all know that the Nintendo 64 has 4 megabytes of RAM, and you can get an extra 4 megabytes of RAM with the expansion pack. Or do we? That's what it says on Wikipedia and everywhere else. But what if I told you the Nintendo 64 actually has 4.5 megabytes of RAM and 9 megabytes with the expansion pack, and the extra data is hidden between all the data that we knew about? I get that at first it sounds like I developed schizophrenia since my last video, but let me explain. While the N64 has approximately 4 million addressable memory cells, these cells, unlike most computers, hold 9 bits of information instead of 8, and typically code running on the machine cannot see or write to the 9th bit, unless you abuse a few hardware quirks that are so hidden that even I just found out about this recently. Across the entire N64 library, I only know of a single game that uses this hidden bit purposefully, and that's Majora's Mask for the Lens of Truth effect. Why this is done and why it's not done in Ocarina of Time is a bit complicated, and the usage of it is also very limited. So, what are the limitations? To answer that, first we need to talk about why SGI, the company that designed the N64 hardware, even added this 9th bit in the first place. This bit exists for rendering. On the N64, the CPU and GPU share the entire memory. Most Nintendo 64 games output 320 by 240 pixels, so 240p, and they combine 2 bytes to form 1 pixel on your TV output. This gives them 2 of these hidden bits. When the N64 renders a pixel of a triangle onto the screen, it also computes what percentage of the screen pixel this triangle covers. This is done for anti-aliasing reasons, so that if a triangle covers a pixel only partially, it can blend the color of the previously rendered geometry with the new triangle pixel's color. This coverage percentage is stored in 2 hidden bits and 1 of the visible bits for future geometry to use. So in total, 1 pixel contains 5 bits red, 5 bits green, 5 bits blue, and 3 bits coverage. Considering this adds up to use 18 bits, if we kept in line with naming conventions, a more accurate marketing slogan for the Nintendo 64 might have been the first console with 18-bit graphics, but I'm sure that wouldn't have sold very well. Since most games are triple buffered, meaning they store the frame buffer 3 times, this means most N64 games already knowingly or unknowingly use around 0.05 megabytes of this hidden 1 megabyte of memory. And just because I already know people will ask why games are triple buffered, it's so you can render to a new frame buffer while the old frame buffer is still being displayed or otherwise being worked on. This adds 2 frames of input lag, but just trust me that it's better than any alternatives we have available to us for now. So, how can we use these hidden bits meaningfully in our program? Since these hidden bits are used for a GPU effect, the GPU has a pretty easy time reading and writing those bits, and does so regularly whenever you render stuff. But since it typically stores to the whole 18 bits when rendering to a pixel, it will affect even data we don't want to write to, usually. Let's first talk about reading the 2 hidden bits, since that's easier and kind of a prerequisite. We can simply use a render mode that uses the coverage bits to render a pixel and deduce what coverage bits were from there after reading the rendered pixel. This would be super slow, but it's possible. And I've hinted at how to write to the hidden 2 bits before. We can render invisible geometry that only affects the lower 2 bits of coverage and not the pixel color to store any data in those 2 bits. And let's say we wanted to store the ASCII value for the letter lowercase a in these extra hidden bits. Since ASCII values are 8 bits, we need to use the hidden bits from 8 different bytes. 8 bytes form 4 pixels as we've discussed before, so we need to render to those 4 pixels. Lowercase a is represented by the hex value 0x1 or this binary number. So the coverage values here would then be ending in 01, 10, 00, and 01. The question marks here are standing for whatever the least significant bit of the 16-bit value already stored in that 2-byte pixel was to produce the correct geometry. We'll therefore first need to read the data and then base our stupid invisible geometry off of that. Coverage has a few funky modes that you can pick, such as set to full or wrap, where adding half coverage twice would wrap back around to 0, so I'm sure generating this geometry is possible. But to be honest, I haven't actually spent any time trying to pull this off, because of reasons I'll get into later. Just know for now, I'm sure it's possible. And also, most emulators can't emulate this behavior correctly. So if I wanted to use this behavior, many people would lose the ability to play my games. And I really don't want that to happen. Fortunately, there's a different way of doing this that is a million times more reasonable. By the way, Majora's Mask uses this hidden bit with the GPU directly instead of having the CPU read or write from it, which is quite a bit less stressful. It uses it for the lens of truth effect to generate this sort of rendering mask. But I won't get into that right now, it's way beyond the scope of this video. The other mode of reading or writing from these bits uses something called the EBUS mode. EBUS is typically only used by the RDP and VI. When reading or writing 4-byte values using the EBUS mode, the 4 lowest 4 bits of the 4-byte values are mapped onto the 4 extra bits of the memory. What are the implications of that? Well, for reading, this is super straightforward. You just activate the EBUS mode, you read the value, and you extract the lower 4 bits, and you're all good. This is perfect because this is relatively fast, it's reliable, and it does not mess with anything else in our system. It's perfect. But let's again try writing our lowercase a using this method. Remember, it's hex 0x1 or this binary number. We put the binary values 0110 into one register and binary value 0001 into another, and store those over 8 bytes of memory with the EBUS mode active. This will fill the 8 hidden bits with our data, but it will also overwrite the 64 visible bits, which is not good. We gave up 64 good and fast to use bits to get 8 bad and slow bits. That defeats the entire purpose. But there is one more messed up and hidden mechanic to this 9th bit we can take advantage of to write every other bit of hidden extra memory and at least get half a megabyte of extra storage instead of the full one. And this one is actually surprisingly reasonable and useful. Whenever we write memory from the CPU, it copies the least significant bit into the hidden bits of all bytes affected. This would typically suck majorly, because it means all our extra storage gets corrupted over time. But it also means we can do this sequence. 1. Read a 2-byte value from memory. 2. Set the least significant bit to whatever bit we want to store in this 16-bit value. Of course, this will corrupt the 2nd byte of memory. And 3. Restore the 2nd byte of memory to whatever it was before our 2nd step. Now, after having done this, we've successfully set 1 bit of extra hidden memory in the first hidden bit of our 2 bytes. This is awesome, and we can read it as discussed before without any issue too. Shoutouts to Hail to the Tongo and Tharo for figuring out these methods. They've been working a lot more closely with the hardware than even I have. Now, one problem probably just became obvious. The exact mechanic that lets us make use of this bit also is our downfall. Whenever we read or write memory, this hidden bit gets corrupted. To practically take advantage of the hidden bit, we have to either be very careful to restore our state whenever we write to a piece of memory, or, much better, we can make use of regions of memory that are typically read-only. One easy pick is our code. Most of our code doesn't change during runtime. In fact, I imagine most programmers would tell you to not dynamically write code ever, but they're cowards, don't listen to them. Self-modifying code is awesome. But because of the fact our code practically never gets written to, we can use the technique we workshopped to store data here without it ever getting corrupted. And that gives us a complete and useful technique. Given all these limitations and quirks, what's the conclusion? What practical advantage can we actually get out of this? Well, I'll be honest, I'm not exactly strapped for memory. Most of my N64 games in memory is empty space that I leave empty because aligning my data to certain byte alignments speeds stuff up. But I also use the expansion pack to make development easier. If I was to work without the expansion pack, this would have large advantages. Let's take a look at vanilla Mario 64's memory layout. Almost a full megabyte of this memory is read-only code. Another 2 megabytes is data that only ever changes once per level entrance. That means we can use the hidden bits and all these 3 million bytes reasonably. If we go with the GPU trick, writing this out comes out to letting us use almost 10% more memory than the N64 was using before. This would be reasonable for if we need those hidden bits in read-only mode. If we go with the CPU-only trick, we only get 5% more memory. But this data can be written to and read fairly quickly. That's absolutely insane if you ask me. Of course, both reading and writing from these areas is slower than our normal memory. But for stuff like dialogue, save data, warp lists, or just about any data that belongs to rarely firing off events such as doors or interaction code, using this data is no problem at all. And there's plenty of data like that. Of course, data you don't need to read much could also just be stored on the cartridge instead of RAM, but then you lose on some compression benefits. But yeah, the read-only hidden bits data is probably very niche and only a few things could really use it, leaving us realistically with only 5% extra data. And there's also an argument to be made that if you really want to optimize memory, there's plenty of other things you could do to Mario 64 first. For example, I imagine the game could fit into just 2.5 megabytes of RAM if someone who knows what they're doing refactors the game. But what about games that were closer to a memory bottleneck?
Here we go. Performance for you. If you know the words, you can join in too.
Donkey Kong 64 famously required the expansion pack because they ran out of memory. Some old Donkey Kong 64 devs once said it's because of a memory leak, but there is none, and others have said that it's because of the dynamic lighting effect, which still makes no sense to me, but that's the narrative the people are running with on YouTube, so let's just go with that. Dynamic lighting would work by having 2 vertex lists on which you dynamically change the vertex colors to fake lighting. This means you duplicate the vertex count in your scene, so you can change one vertex list while the other is being rendered. Technically, you could go with just one, but that would run the risk of introducing an issue similar to screen tearing. Let's assume Donkey Kong 64 scenes are big. Let's go with 10,000 dynamically lit vertices to be safe. In my estimations, I don't think I've ever seen more than 1,000 dynamically lit vertices at most, but let's just assume 10 times that. One vertex is 16 bytes, so this would be 0x27100 bytes of memory, or about 4% of the N64's total RAM. That's less than what we've gained here, although Donkey Kong 64 may have less memory available to use with this method. And to be honest, there's probably much easier to implement memory savings than this hidden bit technique that don't require you to give a piece of your soul to the N64 hardware's sacrificial altar to achieve. Besides, one look at the N64's memory while Donkey Kong 64 is running, and you'll see they are easily actively using more than 7 megabytes of the N64's memory. And you can throw out any hope of using this technique to get it below 4 megabytes. And you can throw out the lighting theory too. If you ask me, they just ended up making the game use 8 megabytes because that makes development so much easier, cheaper, and faster. But this technique is possible and valuable, and I would make use of this technique if not for the fact that not a single currently released emulator can emulate this. Even the most accurate emulator available, Aris, can't emulate this yet. Some of you may have heard that the Analog 3D FPGA is going to be 100% accurate in their marketing claims, but I don't know how true that is, and I imagine this is going to be one of the mechanics that won't even be emulated on the Analog. I'll definitely be getting one and verify that's actually accurate as they claim. Either way, in the year 2024, if you make use of this technique, you will seriously limit your audience to only people that play on real hardware. Let me know if you enjoy these technical breakdowns. I find these are the easiest videos for me to make because it's what I'm most passionate about, but I always fear that no one will watch them or understand what I'm talking about. Shoutouts to all my Patreons for supporting my videos. I'm currently working on my own N64 game that makes use of all the N64 tech me and the rest of the community have found. I'm currently halfway done with the last course in my game, and then just a couple of side levels and polishes are missing. I'm so excited to share my project with you guys, eventually. I still can't project a release date yet, but it's slowly coming together. See you guys in the next video. Bye!